let's break down the costs of building a tiny home. We're going to answer the question of what is the most expensive part of a tiny home, how to save money on a tiny home build, and what is a good budget for a tiny home in this video. So, what is the most expensive part of a tiny home, or how do you break down the cost? Well, there's two key costs. You have the materials and you have the labor. Within the labor, you also have cost. You have the actual construction labor, but you also have the design and planning labor. If you just start building a home without a plan or design, well, you're going to waste a lot of material and a lot of construction labor. So you want to put some time into planning it. So those are your big cost bases. Within that, labor as a single kind of unit is going to be your bigger cost. Materials may end up costing more, but there's many different kinds of materials. Labor overall is generally grouped all together. But within materials, which is often what people think about, you've got a few different categories. One, you have your structure. If it's a tiny house on wheels, you have your trailer, as well as the structure built on top of it. If it's on foundation, you got the foundation system, as well as what's built on top. Structure includes things like framing, sheathing, like I have behind me, the roof, all of those things that build that exterior structure and exterior envelope of the building. Those are often, or I should say, the costs that really can't change. They are there, and you're gonna have a hard time getting around those costs. Then you have what's inside the walls, effectively. You have things like electrical and plumbing and sewer and HVAC, these things that take a hollow structure and put in the functionality that you need to live. Those in a tiny home can be more cost effective than a larger home because you have less area you have to run electrical wire in, which is very expensive per foot, and less area that you have to run, plumbing and things like that. At the same time, a lot of people underestimate the task of putting in electrical and plumbing in a tiny home, and it leads to more costs. Well, what do I mean by that? This is an interesting point. If you plumb or run electrical for a 3,000 square foot house, you've got a lot of wall area that you can run all those bits and pieces into, and a lot of floor area or ceiling area. And you don't have to do as much kind of pre-planning. There's generally space to fit things. That's often not the case in a tiny home. In a tiny home, we're putting all of those things, your kitchen, your bathroom, all the plumbing associated with that, your HVAC, all of that stuff in a much, much smaller space with a lot less floor area or wall area and roof area. And oftentimes we don't even have a traditional ceiling, we have a vaulted ceiling of kinds. And so actually running electrical and plumbing inside the walls of a tiny home can be much more challenging. It's really good to plan that out carefully. We see a lot of folks saying, well, I don't have to run that much, but they end up burning through a lot of material because they keep having to redo things. So don't underestimate the material / planning that goes along with some of those utilities effectively. And then you have your interior finishing. Of course, in a tiny home, you don't have quite as much floor you have to put down, or maybe quite as much wall that you have to cover. But you want to be much more thoughtful about those because the impact is going to be higher. So often we'll see that it's worthwhile to spend a little bit more to get good materials in those so that you can have that feeling that you really want in that home that makes it feel spacious and large. At the same time, don't underestimate the cost of all the things. Even though it's a smaller home, you still are going to have a kitchen and everything that goes with that, and the expensive parts of the kitchen, the sink and the faucet and all the plumbing for the faucet and all that kind of stuff. You're still going to have a fridge and all the electrical work and things like that for a fridge. You still may have a washer and dryer and all the plumbing for that. You're still going to have a shower or a bathtub and all the plumbing with that, and a vanity and all the plumbing of that. So those are all expensive pieces, and just because the home is smaller, you have the cost of those materials. But again, the cost of those materials can vary based on how you buy them and where you buy them. So high level, when we're talking about what to expect, breaking down the cost of a tiny home, you've got 2 or 3 buckets. Big buckets, labor, materials. Within labor, you have design and planning, and then you have the actual construction labor itself. Don't underestimate the importance of design and proper planning in terms of lowering the overall cost of your project. And then in materials, there's various ways to break down materials, but from a kind of simple perspective, you can think about the building envelope. In other words, what's required to have a well-sealed, well-built building that you can go into. You can think about then all the utilities inside of it, your electrical and your plumbing and your sewage and your HVAC, things like this that got to be run in the walls. Those are generally don't cost as much as a larger home, but are very tricky to run effectively. And then you have all your finishings, which can get quite expensive. So break those down, make sure you're thinking about all your costs in your BOM when you're building your tiny home. Finally, what we do at Clever Tinies, for example, is we do a limited number of models. And the reason we do that is we can take that planning labor and really invest, spend a lot of time at that planning stage and in that planning labor. And so we can have things that are really optimized and really, really well designed. And then we can amortize that across a lot of units. And so that the actual cost of that time is not much on a per unit basis. And that's why we tend not to do custom designs. But of course, if you're trying to build your dream home, you're going to want to spend that design and planning time to get it right. So that's a little bit of breaking down the cost that you can expect when you're thinking about a tiny home.